The C6 Corvette Grand Sport, one of the best value sports cars under $50,000, and designed to give Z06-like handling without paying Z06 money. The Grand Sport leaves little to be desired, giving the best of both worlds and acting as a middle ground between the base model and the much more intense Z06. This is a vehicle that succeeds in every aspect of performance, and today, we're going to look at why this car is considered to be the ultimate value proposition. So getting into some of the stats of the C6 Grand Sport, it's kind of that best of both worlds Corvette, where you have the powertrain of the base model, but a lot of the handling and braking packages similar to what you would see on the Z06. And the way that that propagates is in the form of the LS3 6.2 liter V8 engine that the base model gets that is pretty much the exact same thing that you see in this car. It produces 430 horsepower and 424 foot-pounds of torque, which is roughly 75 each less than the Z06 of this same year. So it is a little bit less powerful, but I promise you 430 is plenty for a car of this weight, around 33 to 3,400 pounds, and it doesn't leave much to be desired in terms of straight line acceleration. Now, the handling of this car, the car is definitely a lot wider than a base model. I had the chance to drive and review a base model maybe 6 months ago, and it was a pretty soft ride, and it definitely didn't beat you up by any stretch of the imagination. And neither is this car. It is a pretty soft ride when you're just driving around town, but you can definitely feel the road a lot more. If you look at the car from the outside, one of the first things that you'll notice is that it's a lot wider than the base model, and that's because it shares the same body panels and body design as the Z06. So the entire fender flares and everything is just a lot wider, the tires are wider, and due to this you can definitely feel a lot more of the road and a lot more of the road noise coming through. The brakes on this car are also pretty similar to the Z06 in that you get drilled rotors that provide plenty of stopping power and pretty much as you would ever need even in a track setting. Now, as far as the transmission options for the Grand Sport are concerned, it's pretty much the same ordeal as something like a base model. You can either option it with a manual or an automatic, and the manuals that usually come in Corvettes are always very good. They're very sturdily built and feel kind of notchy, but they're very tightly put together, and that is something that is kind of one of the better aspects of buying a car like this. However, this particular one, this 2012 Grand Sport that I'm in today, is actually optioned with an automatic. And normally I would prefer the manual, especially because Corvette manual transmissions are so good. They do have very long throws, a heavy clutch, and are overall very satisfying to drive. But the automatic, I really cannot fault. It's a lot more comfortable when it comes to just around town usages. You're not having to constantly kick in your clutch. And the automatic in this car doesn't really shift oddly or do anything weird. I can't really fault it. It does come with some paddle shifters that allow you to manually actuate which gear you're in, and those are a little bit sluggish, but overall pretty responsive for what they are. So that you're hearing is the dual mode exhaust that Chevy puts in both the Grand Sport and the Z06 of this model year. Now, that exhaust is what you would call something like a mild to wild, in that if you're driving around town lightly and you're not accelerating the car hard or anything like that, the valves that actually sit inside of the exhaust will remain closed to keep the car a little bit quieter. But anytime that you give the car hard acceleration or anything like that, they do actually open up, and that's what makes the car so loud. Now, if you really don't like the fact that they close all the time, you can pull the fuse out of the fuse box that makes the entire system work, and that's what the owner of this one did. What that'll do is it'll make sure that those valves stay open all of the time, and basically that'll make it like you have an aftermarket exhaust, but pretty much coming from the factory. And I will say the suspension in here, they actually did a pretty amazing job with, because when you throw it into a turn or you put it around a corner pretty hard or anything like that, the springs actually are very stiff, and it makes for a very fast response to bumps, and it makes the car very planted, and it just feels like it is glued to the road. So on a track or anything like that, the car is going to be a lot more stable around high-speed turns. However, when you're just driving around lightly and not really pushing the car at all, it actually does ride pretty soft. For whatever reason, the springs seem to kind of soften up, and I guess this might be from the dampers. I think the dampers in the suspension might be pretty soft, because any bumps or anything actually get mellowed out pretty nicely, and it overall makes for a pretty comfortable driving experience. And really the only thing about ride quality that is any worse than something like a C6 base model is the amount of noise that gets into the cabin. Due to the wider tires and slightly wider wheelbase, what will end up happening is I think a bit more of that noise, vibration, and harshness ends up finding its way into the cabin, and it is definitely a little bit louder in here. Now, speaking of the cabin and interior, this has never been Corvette's strong point. The entire value proposition of a Corvette is to give you the best performance possible for the cheapest dollar value, and largely the car has always succeeded at that, and that's what's mainly responsible for why these cars are so popular. However, the interior of this car has been upgraded significantly from the previous generation. I myself own a 2004 Z06, and the interior was made of all sorts of weird rubbers and plastics. It creaked like all the time, literally anytime you touched anything. And they refined it quite a bit for this generation. The fin finish is definitely a lot neater, a lot tighter. Now, it's not going to be the nicest interior that you've ever sat in, but overall, I don't really have any complaints with it. The seats are very comfortable, the steering wheel is good, the gauge cluster is very nicely designed. It's still analog gauges, nothing digital yet, which I honestly prefer. I think it looks very clean, it's easy to read. And the last thing about this interior that I actually wanted to show while I was in this car is this heads-up display right there that you can see. It shows your speed, your gear, plenty of information that could be useful. It shows RPMs, and overall, that just makes it really nice because you don't have to be looking at this dashboard at all. You can be looking up at the road, and that heads-up display really does help with how engaging this entire driving experience really can be. Overall, for the interior, I don't really have any complaints, and for what this car costs and for what this car is, it is really quite as good as you could possibly ever expect it to be. But now that we've done kind of a general overview of the C6 Grand Sport, we're going to do a bit more in-depth talking about both the exterior and the interior. So as we get into the exterior and kind of the looks of the C6 Grand Sport, I think it has to be said that this is one of the most beautiful Corvettes ever made. It has the same sleek design that pretty much any C6 would, and is really the pinnacle of what Corvette managed to accomplish in this kind of era and generation. Back in 1997, when they went to the C5 generation, the Corvette kind of adopted this sleek body style that continued all the way up until 2013, until eventually the C7 generation came out and adopted a bit more of an aggressive styling and looks. This is pretty much as good as it gets, though, as this Z06 body style comes with these nice, really wide fenders, all of these vents and ducts that are pretty much all over the entire car, and just make it look a lot more detailed and intricate pretty much around the entire vehicle. Now, getting into some of the functionality of them, the hood vent that you see right there, the big duct that leads into the hood, as far as I'm aware, it is not functional. There are some ducts that cool the front brakes that go underneath the front of the car, and these that are supposed to be letting air out from the brakes, these are not functional, but oddly enough, these ones that sit behind the door are functional. They actually do cool these rear brakes. They allow air in right here. They pull it through a channel around and it shoots right onto the back of your rear rotors. So that is definitely a pretty cool aspect of this design. Now, as we get into the front side of the car, this front bumper is pretty similar to the Z06 in that it is a lot wider, a lot more intricate. You have this hood scoop right here, and the entire grille is pretty much redesigned from something like the base model. You have your DRLs on both sides, as well as your headlights here, which the underside of is paint matched to the bodywork, and I think that makes them look a lot nicer and more subtle. The hood, as far as I'm aware, is pretty similar. I believe the bulge in the middle might be a little bit bigger, but the main spot that you will see a difference is the fenders. They definitely raise a lot wider and a lot higher than something like the base model, and it makes the car look a lot more aggressive from mainly the front end and pretty much from the sides as well. This all leads into the rims, which actually have a pretty good fitment from factory, and Corvette's rims have never really been its strong point in my opinion, but I have to say they did a very good job with these. The Grand Sport rims are a pretty simple 5-spoke design, and you can get them in either chrome or black. We're looking at the chrome ones here on this example, and behind these is the brakes that we have talked about earlier, with pretty much rotors as big as you could possibly fit onto a rim of this size, a 6-piston caliper that creates a pretty tremendous braking force, and drilled holes all the way through your rotor to allow for additional cooling. Now, the side of the car is also a lot more intricate than something like the base model, as this duct right here not only is bigger than something like the base model, where that would be a slit, now you have that full Z06 design, but that also carries some additional lines into the bodywork that carry all the way back towards the rear of the car. Now, I want to get a little bit into the paintwork of this vehicle as well, as the paint on sports cars is something that could kind of make or break it. And in my opinion, that is definitely something that makes this car. So this comes in a pretty dark red that is similar to something that you would see like the red mist metallic in today's C8 Corvette. And it looks very nice when it's light outside. It looks a bit like a maroon and a bit more flat when it's dark out, but when sunlight is hitting it like it is on this beautiful day here, you see all sorts of metallic flakes in the paint, and it just really shines and makes the car pop. It's clearly, in my opinion, the highlight of the exterior of this car. Now, getting into the quality of it, it's a very thick coat of paint, and it's held up tremendously over the course of 10 years. This is being filmed in 2023, and this is a 2012 model year car, so it is over a decade old. And if you look through this entire front end, you cannot find a single paint chip. Now, given that is probably a lot because of how well the car has been taken care of, so that pretty much tells us that the paint quality on these vehicles is very high, and the amount of attention to detail that goes into it with all the metallic flakes that run through it also makes the car very special. Now, as we move to the roof of the car, this is pretty much like a built-in sunroof. This is entirely removable from here. There's just a few latches inside of the car, but this one allows a lot of sunlight in, but from the outside appears to just be black, which I think looks pretty nice as it's broken up by this red strip here. Now, as we look a little bit more in detail at the back of the car, it's pretty much a similar story to the front. These rear fenders here have this big flare that comes out and follows the shape of these wider rear wheels that provide a good amount of traction. I would say this car is right on the edge. If it had any more power as we get into the Z06 territory, it becomes a bit much to handle and the car can get loose on you really easy, but this is definitely just enough where it's right on that edge of where the back end starts to get away from you. As we move to the rear here, the rear bumper is pretty similar to the rest of the C6 Corvettes, and there is your quad tip central exhaust that we see on pretty much all Corvettes, and there's the dual mode active exhaust flaps that sit right inside of it that will open and close as you drive the car. The rear end of it right here, this glass window, comes all the way to the back, and this is pretty much where the majority of your trunk and storage space is going to be. There is actually plenty in this car. I have a Subaru BRZ that can be seen right about there, and this trunk actually has significantly more space for storage than that car. So it definitely is daily drivable. You can take a fair amount of stuff around with you, and these cars are plenty livable from a practicality standpoint. So as we go ahead and take a seat in the 2012 Grand Sport, as I was saying earlier, this interior is a lot nicer than the previous generation. It is a pretty comfortable place to be. Starting out with these seats, there's plenty of different interior colors that you can get. This one happens to have this kind of light tan and black combination, but the seats have some pretty nice bolsters on the side that keep you relatively held in. They're made of a pretty high quality leather that over the past 10 years seems to show very little signs of fade or creasing or anything like that, so it's definitely holding up well and it's high quality material. But all in all, I think the seats look pretty good. They feel pretty good. They're very comfortable, very soft to sit in. They're not a hard ride at all or anything like that. And it overall just makes for a pretty comfortable and enjoyable experience. This is a car that I would definitely take on a road trip with really no problems at all. The steering wheel itself is pretty simple. There's nothing special about it, but there's also nothing bad about it either. It's just a nice leather material that has these two notches right here for your hands as well. So no complaints there, but also nothing special. The gauge cluster is very nice. It comes with this nice white lettering that makes everything very easy to see, with two big gauges in the center, one that shows your RPMs, the other that shows your speed, and it's overall just very easy to read. It's all analog and it looks very nice. As we get to the center console here, it has this kind of plastic material that sits right here, but with this nice, almost kind of like a carbon fiber design that runs through it, and I just think it looks pretty high quality for what it is. The infotainment in this car is nothing special, as any Corvette is. This is not going to be the highlight of the car. The screen does just about what you need it to. It does have a full navigation system, full radio, anything like that. The storage in here is pretty good. You do have two little storage compartments on each of the doors and a center console right here that does open up and allow you to put some stuff in there. I think it's good if you want to keep like your phone and your wallet in there. It is definitely plenty of space for that. There's also two cup holders right here in the middle of the center console. Now, they're pretty small, and I can't imagine you using them for much, but the car does have them if you need them. And wrapping up inside of the interior, as I touched on earlier, there is this removable roof right here that just has two latches that are underneath these panels. You just take this, open it up, you do the same thing on the other side, and then there's one more latch that actually sits behind the seats right here, and the whole thing will lift right off. So it is that Targa Top style where you can drive it with no roof on, and that also makes for a pretty cool experience. Just remember, when you are putting the roof back on, to latch these back down. You can find plenty of videos all over the internet where someone's driving along and the roof just kind of goes away and there's no more roof. So be sure to prevent that from being you. Wrapping things up, the C6 Corvette Grand Sport is one of the most intriguing performance bargains available right now. For just around $40,000, a used one will provide a racetrack-proven suspension and a handling package from the Z06, all while retaining the same monstrous LS3 V8 from the base model paired with a dual-mode exhaust that will have your ears begging for more. Although the interior might not be the greatest and there are plenty of other options out there, I think you would be hard-pressed to find a driving experience as mesmerizing as what the Grand Sport can provide and at the same price point. And for that reason, I would say the C6 Grand Sport is plenty worthy of a buyer's consideration. This has been a car review with Running to Redline. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.